As I prepared last night, I came home from work. It was about 7 o'clock, and I asked my daughter, I said, I want to go through this presentation one more time. Would you sit downstairs with me and listen? And we got downstairs about 8 o'clock, I suppose. And typically she's going to bed. She's 12 years old at that 8 o'clock time period to read. And so I'm taking my time. I'm going through the presentation, and she starts to yawn. And she's tired. And when I get done, and I said, how was it? She said, sort of boring. And then she went to bed. So I'm going to reserve the right to throw candy at those that start to nod off here, if that's okay. You know, as I was thinking about today, I had some questions for everyone. And the first question I thought was appropriate, being here at St. John's. I think we could debate this question in this conference most of the day and never come to an answer. But being at St. John's, I think that Brother Paul and Josie, you could maybe help us find that answer at lunchtime? Maybe? I think the question that's more relevant today is this one here, and is it what comes first? Does your confidence come first, or does your success come first? And again, I think you can debate that question back and forth. There's a lot of successful people that are confident, and yet the confident people that I know seem to be successful. So again, I ask that question, what comes first? Can you have success without confidence, or can you have confidence without success? And as we ponder that question, I think by you taking the time today to being here at the 2019 sales conference for Murphy Granite and Little Falls Monument, I think you're taking a bold step forward in creating both your confidence and your path to success. When Don asked me to present, I pondered the idea, and I drove to his office and I sat down and I said, Don, I'm not a good public speaker. That's not who I am. And he said, Shannon, I know. You're going to make Chris look really good next. So, Chris, you're welcome. You're welcome. Don asked me to talk about the past and the present and the future. Where we've come from and where we are and where we're likely to be in the near future. So before I get in there and have that conversation, I want to let you know my name is Shannon Asmus. I'm a 1989 graduate of the University of Minnesota Mortuary Science program. I graduated from the U. I took my first job in the South Metro. I was offered my first employment agreement. It was $19,000 a year. I thought it was really something. I moved out of the funeral home that I was at. I got my own apartment. I bought my first car. My student loans came due. And I realized real quick that I didn't have enough money to pay for my lifestyle anymore. And so I slowed down and I went to my employer and I asked him if there was an opportunity to earn more income. I didn't ask him for more money just to pay me, but an opportunity to earn some more income. And we sat in the break room having a cup of coffee, and he said, yeah, there's an opportunity for you to earn some more income. Why don't you try to sell some granite? And if you listen to that, if you got the key word there, he said, sure. You can try to sell some granite. See, back in 1989, there wasn't a lot of funeral homes, in my experience, that were selling a lot of granite. And I have to admit, where I was working at the time, most of our burials went to Fort Snelling National Cemetery, so we didn't have the opportunity. But if you were lucky enough to have a family that had selected a private cemetery, maybe like Lakewood Cemetery, you had an opportunity. But you soon realized that the cemetery, Ron's staff, was good at what they did. You know, their job was to follow through with that family and the cemetery needs. My job was different than that. But their job, they knew the rules and the regulations of the cemetery. And so, as my employer said, you can try to sell some granite. It wasn't what we did well. What we did well was service to family, much like you funeral directors do today, and that's service to family. But our job at that point, we spent more time arranging our visitation space than we ever talked about on granite sales. That's where we were, 1989, and for the next few years. Body preparation, the embalming, the cosmetizing, the casketing, that's where we spent our time. Marker sales, didn't think of it. But if you were lucky enough, once in a while, you had that opportunity. You know, I go back to those days and when my employer said, you know, you've got an opportunity to sell some granite. We didn't even have a granite display. We had to take an old vault display and take that and change that over to a granite display, and we went to our Brand X company and we got some granite and put it out there and made it work. And we had some success, but not a lot. Cemetery salespeople and the monument shops were much better at that than the funeral home. Jump ahead to 2004. I left the metro sales position, or my funeral home, and I joined my local hometown funeral home. And again, we sold markers and monuments there, but we weren't good at it. And for those of you my age or older, what was the cremation rate in 1994?
0.
In rural Minnesota, it was pretty low. Statewide, the cremation rate in 1994 was 20%. And so most of the families that we were serving were burial families. And although we sold markers, our kit, if you go back in those days, our sales kit, it was a wide briefcase. And it was kept in the closet. And if the family, and many families in rural Minnesota went to the local cemetery, you'd go grab that briefcase and you'd pull it out and you'd have these little granite chips. And they're 2x2 squares. Do you remember those? Those 2x2 squares? Maybe some of them were 3x2 squares. Well, that was our sales kit. And we had some order forms, and that was all we had. Again, the monument shops, that's what they did, and we served the family. As times have changed, we've become more engrossed. And in 1996, that's when this guy walked in my door. He walks right in, and he says to me, let's go from Brand X, where we're at, to Murphy Granite. And it didn't happen right away. We didn't trust the guy. He was pretty slick. He had a lot of things to say. But it took a few times, and after he convinced us, he came in and he said, you know, follow me to that promised land. And when we agreed to go, the rest is history. Don and I have been friends since about 1996. When you meet a couple guys that you connect with, that you like, that you actually trust, the advice is to hitch your wagon to them and go for the ride, because we trusted and we liked and we connected with Don and Todd. You were the guys we were going to be with. And we were there for a couple of years working with you guys, and we realized by then who the brains were. Scott? We figured it out. It took a while, but we finally met you. So thank you. Our relationship worked. If you go back in those days, every year, Don would come in with a new brochure, a new sales aid. He always had something up his sleeve. He was always pushing. If you take a step back, and those old marker and monument brochures were archaic. They were not very good at what we had. And if you look at what has been created over the years, every year Don would change it. And ultimately, at the end of the year, we sold more granite every year in and year out. There were a few lessons that I learned between the time I met with Murphy Granite, and those lessons were, there was a difference between being present with the family and being engaged. Being present for me was, I was good at that. I made those arrangements, and I sat with them and I collected all that statistical information. I knew that the funeral was going to be at Zion Lutheran Church. I was good. And we did all that. We called the flower order in, we got the vault order in. I was present for that arrangement. We did everything right. But being engaged with that family meant being present to the next level. It meant that you were following through with their needs. And we knew at that point that they needed a marker or monument. But one of the most important lessons that transpired out of the relationship with Don, Todd, and Scott was the idea of the yellow pad of paper. It's not yellow here, but it was on my desk. Over the past, the yellow pad of paper, and you know, I quickly learned when I was at the funeral home that when the funeral was over, the flowers delivered, and all of the paperwork completed, we would place the deceased file in the cabinet and we were quickly on to the next funeral. And we didn't worry about markers and monuments and aftercare and all those things that we're doing today that are different. We focused on service to family, and that was at that time was about the visitation and the body presentation. When I began using this document here on the side of my desk, it changed. Although I was always present for the arrangement, I became fully engaged. I became better equipped to follow through with the family's needs. And what I mean by that is, on every time we had a death, starting January 1st, we would put down the date of death. And we'd put down the name of the individual that died. And we'd say burial or cremation. And we'd say, what cemetery did they go to? And then we'd put down, did they need a marker, a monument, or an engraving? And then we'd make some notes. And that sat on the side of my desk for the next several years. And every time there was a death, we'd put that in there. And we followed that through. Now, you can tell that some of those families are going to go to Fort Snelling National Cemetery, and they don't need a marker because it's already taken care of. And some of those families are going to choose cremation and not have a burial, or they're going to be shipped out of state. So you document all of that. You're creating what we would call opportunities. Fast forward to 2004. What's the cremation rate in 2004? Jay? Oh, 36% statewide in 2004. 1 in 3 families are now selecting cremation as their form of disposition. We're starting to see families at this point choose no service, no burial. So they're taking that. How do you sell more granite? It was also in 2004 which I started working for Burton Company. When I took that position, my responsibility to the company was our cemetery needs, which included markers, monuments, and engraving. My first call was to Don Calhoun, and the next day I was in his office. Through hundreds of conversations, I was able to learn more about granite needs in the cemetery. What I learned when I started traveling with our funeral homes and our directors is that my history on granite sales was motivated for money. I wanted to sell for the opportunity to earn more income. But what I learned, some of our directors also wanted that opportunity for more income. But yet others wanted that opportunity just to serve the family. They weren't motivated for the dollars. But there was one human characteristic that was universal, and that was the characteristic of serving the family from the beginning to the end, determining the opportunity that was there, the need that the family had, and following through. As an organization, we started to look at the number of opportunities. So I'm just going to take a minute and go through how we determined the opportunity. I mentioned that we put all of the dates of deaths up there and the names, and we'd know that they went to Fort Snelling or the local cemetery. We knew that they had a need or not. So out of a 100-case business, if 80 of those families needed a marker or monument or engraving, we had 80 opportunities. We knew that. We knew that through history and through our relationship with Don, that 50% of all of the families that had an opportunity had a marker or monument already at the cemetery. Therefore, 50% of all of those families needed an engraving. The other 50%, or the other 40 out of this 100 called business, would need a marker or monument. And therefore, we started looking at our goals and expectations. We talked about that. And so 50% of those families were buying an engraving and 50% needed a marker or monument. And we felt that we could sell 50% of those families. So 20 families would buy a marker or monument from us. Over the past 15 years, the cremation rate has grown from 36% to 63%. In 3 years, it's expected to be at 69% statewide. Within our organization, we've got funeral homes today that are doing 80% cremation. We're seeing more and more families selecting direct cremation with no service, and they're taking the cremated remains home. The yellow pad of paper, although maybe has changed from 1994, 95 to a computer-generated spreadsheet, or maybe it's a customer service management tool that you folks are using. But the opportunities haven't changed. Once again, if you're as old as I, you know the services we provide today are similar, yet the number of opportunities have changed. Our services are similar in that we have families still going to the cemetery, be it traditional burial or cremation. However, with the increased rate of cremation and the non-traditional services, fewer families are utilizing the cemetery. Therefore, Don, Todd, and Scott have created a wider range of items to present to each family you serve. Do you know what those are? Are you staying relevant with the families that you're connected with? You know, as Don had mentioned in the write-up that I was part of Cana. I'm going to take just a second and take a plug for them. If you're not a member of Cana, I'm going to encourage you to research them out, Cremation Association of North America. In Minnesota alone, Cana is predicting that we're going to be at 90% cremation rate in the next 15 years. Staggering when you think about that. When I entered funeral service in 1989, it was 15%, and we're going to be at 90% soon. How are you changing your business to stay relevant with that consumer? But the sky's not falling. I don't believe that. Yes, society is changing, and with this change, we have opportunity. Will you be present in this conversation or engaged? Get your pad of paper out and learn the true number of opportunities. If you're honest with yourself, you'll learn that many of these opportunities you'll learn the true number of your opportunities and how you're following through. Now, you can see Don somewhere here, and he's yelling at me, saying that there are many more sales aids and tools than a yellow pad of paper. Right here are the sales aids that have been created over the years. And as you go through this list of sales aids, the brochures, just take a second and go back to 1989 and those archaic brochures that we had to sell granite. And look at what is created for you today to hand out to all of the families that you're serving. You've got the price book, is second to none. If you understand that, if you're young into the sales process of markers, look at this sales book, and it's fantastic. You got the 3-ring binders, and you've got an order buddy. Who's using the order buddy? You've got a colored layout brochure. Back in 1989, back at my Minneapolis days, when we asked for a layout, they would take a white piece of paper and draw a marker out there and put the name on there. And that's what it's going to look like. That's what the family had to choose from. And today we get a color-generated to-scale layout. Displays. How many funeral homes have a wonderful display sitting there, interior or exterior? If you don't have one, contact Murphy Granite. They'll set it up for you. Your website. It's another tool that you have. You've got Murphy Granite's website, you've got your own website, are there links and all of those things. You've got to be utilizing all of your resources because the families today are shopping differently than they've ever done before. I'm going to encourage you to talk to to Don, Todd, and Scott about programs. We've had a marker day at several of our locations every year where we invite the consumer in, the families that we've served over the year that didn't buy a marker or monument. We've got all of the opportunities. We knew that off that yellow pad of paper what those were. We've invited them in. And then the other sales aid is right here, and that is learning at this annual sales conference. Certainly if you're a funeral director or a pre-need person, you spent the better part of 2 hours with the family. You've gathered all the traditional statistical information, and then the question you have to start asking yourself, are you engaged in this process or are you just present? Because if you're engaged, you know that they're going to the cemetery. That's pretty basic. You spent 2 hours. You know that the Smith family had the death, and you know that Robert Smith died, married to Sarah, because you sat with Sarah for 2 hours. You also know that the church was important to him, that Sarah went to church every Sunday and Robert would move snow. You also know that Robert was born on the family farm and he died there, because you sat with his family for 2 hours. You know all of this information. And while you were making those arrangements, you sat there and you met the children. This is an order buddy. This is one of your tools. If you're not using this tool to engage your family in the conversation, you're shorting yourself. You know that they have an opportunity. You know that they are going to the cemetery. If you're not doing just this, in my opinion, you're shorting yourself the opportunity to sell that family a marker or a monument. Everyone in this room is a death care professional, and we're all here to serve the family to the best of our ability. Maybe you're a cemeterian, a monument dealer, or a funeral director, but we're all in this together. Don't wait for your confidence to be successful, and don't wait for your success to be confident. I'm going to leave you with 2 quotes. If you're not willing to learn, no one can help you. If you're determined to learn, no one can stop you. And I applaud you for being here today. And the past is your lesson, the present is your gift, and the future is your motivation. Any questions? Yep.
Are you proposing that someone create something like this before you even sit down with the family and start talking about a memorial? You walk into the sales meeting with that?
I'm a funeral director, so I'm talking to funeral directors, and if one of our staff members is meeting with the family and we know that they're going to the cemetery for burial, I encourage them to start the conversation with something like this. To send the information to Murphy Granite, they'll zip it around and send it right back to us. Then during the visitation, we can present an idea to the family and they can start making the changes. Yes, it's the conversation starter that does work.
So you create that on your own without getting any input from the family?
Correct.
Based off the obituary, what they've been telling you, you grew up on the farm?
Yep.
Very often, Mike, we do have this generated ahead of time by funeral directors where they've sat with the family. What this does is this creates a conversation starting point. And that's a fabulous way to make sure that you're engaging with those people.
Absolutely.
Great tool. Fantastic tool. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Shannon, thank you very much. Fabulous.